What happened to Bron in Poppy Playtime? We first saw him in the Chapter 1 trailer, where he's this giant toy dinosaur that seemed to be one of Chapter 1's antagonists. However, as we all know, we never ended up seeing an alive version of Bron. But that's until about 2 years ago, when Mob uploaded a video to their YouTube channel called restrictedrestoration.mp4. And in this video, we see Bron, or Experiment 1199, be transferred into his new body, where the toys would then realize that something was different about him. But we first have to go over his backstory, because Bron wasn't always a toy, and actually used to work for Playtime Co. And this went on for decades, and his name was Thomas Clark. Being born in 1932, Thomas eventually became a doctor and applied for a full-time job as a pediatrician when he was just 23 years old. He was then hired and worked there for about 36 years. However, we do actually know a little bit about what happened when he was working at the company. During his time at Playtime Co., he witnessed Theodore Granbell being taken to the hospital after his failed attempt to escape the factory with the prototype, and even says that he saw the prototype himself. And after this, he was on a call with his friend Joel Sinclair, who was the head counselor of Playcare at the time. They were talking about what happened with Theodore until Thomas says that the thing he saw could have been Theodore's imaginary friend, saying that he saw it with his own eyes and didn't even know what it could be, which most likely led to Thomas having some suspicion about what the company was really doing with their profits. However, he was eventually diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, meaning that if he was gonna die soon anyway, he might as well try to become an experiment himself. But this did not end up going well, as the other toys did not like Thomas at all. In the video uploaded to Mob's YouTube channel, we see a female scientist describing Thomas and what happened to him. She tells us that, of sound mind, Thomas volunteered for this experiment, most likely trying to avoid death, and the camera cuts to what seems to be Thomas waking up after being attacked, with his eyes darting around the room, most likely shocked and confused as to what's going on. But then it cuts back to when he was still okay, and the female scientist tells us that he's experiencing a lot of disorientation, much more than they expected, saying that his mental testing was cut in half, and that he probably doesn't even know where he is. But then she tells us the bad news that the other toys could tell that something was off about him, where it then cuts to show us the attack where Boxy Boo tried to kill Bron. We see Bron in the middle of a giant room, looking both confused and sad at the same time, as he was all alone with all of the other toys just staring at him. But this is when we see Boxy Boo's claw hit him right in the face, and the camera cuts to black. The scientists then rush in to see if they can save Bron, but all they see is his body on the floor with blood splattered around him. The female scientist then tells us that if they hadn't stepped in, Bron would have been killed. Although he didn't die, his thyroid and larynx were completely devoured, most likely by Boxy Boo. It then took 12 hours worth of surgery in order to stabilize Bron and keep him alive. But this might have been a bad thing for him, because even though he may have survived the attack, they kept him in isolation from that point forward, away from all of the other toys who might try to kill him, which is where we see him in his own room in basically solitary confinement, just laying there, not doing a single thing or having a single thing to distract himself with. But here's the thing, we don't necessarily see Bron's death, so it's technically possible that he's still alive. And since Bron is a well-liked character, it's possible that we'll even end up seeing him in Chapter 5, because the video seems to be recorded in the labs where they were experimenting on him, and I'm assuming that because this room looks different compared to the prison, which means Bron could have been kept in the labs for his entire life. And if the labs are the prototype's home, it's possible that he kept Bron alive, but it's unlikely. But what was different about Bron that led to him being attacked. I mean, he looked just like all of the other toys, and we see many Huggies in the same room as him, so it couldn't have been his size. It's likely that it was due to the fact that he was the first experiment that involved a staff instead of an orphan, and the buildup of animosity towards the staff could have been unleashed in this moment. In other words, bro was an imposter, so instead it would have to be the way that he behaved, and not even necessarily the way that he talked, because it seems that he wasn't even able to talk, either because of the way that he was made or because of his mental state after the transplant. We know that pretty much all of the experiments were orphans before they were transplanted into their new bodies, so it's possible that with Thomas being an older man who was an ex-employee of Playtime Co., that could have led to some very tense friction between the toys and him, because they would associate him with the scientists that would have been torturing them all this time. But we may end up seeing another version of Bron in chapter 5 regardless, because in the chapter 1 trailer, the Bron toy literally looks at us, meaning that it's alive. And although it didn't appear in chapter 1, it did make an appearance in chapter 2, but it didn't move. Because once we make it into the rejected toy room, we have to move a crane over to a Bron toy in order to get it off of the elevator. But this isn't the one that I'm talking about, but just to the left of the controls, we see what seems to be the exact Bron toy from the trailer. So it's possible that he didn't move in order to observe us, and then later he would come to kill us if he was commanded by the prototype. And we know that there were hundreds of Bigger Bodies experiments, and what are the odds that there's just a giant Bron statue right smack dab in the middle of the rejected toy room in the way of everybody else? Which leads me to believe that we might end up seeing this version of Bron in a future chapter, which honestly would be pretty dope and would give Mob a better dinosaur character that they hopefully won't kill in 5 seconds. But here's the thing, there were many attempts to include Bron in the game, and it's pretty much a running gag that Bron is hinted at in chapters 1, 2, and 3, but then he just wouldn't pull up. And according to an ex-employee at Mob Entertainment, he was intended to appear in all 3 chapters, but it just never worked out. For example, he was meant to appear in the Playhouse area instead of Dog Day, which was part of the reason that Mob even created the video about Bron in the first place. But according to the same employee, the last attempt prior to his leaving of Mob Entertainment was to make Bron the monster inside of Playcare's toy store. However, the entire thing was cut out when the toy store wasn't included in the chapter. But what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and click on this video right here.